Our call to worship is number 434 in the Gray Hymnal. May we be reminded here of our highest aspirations and inspired to bring our gifts of love and service to the altar of humanity. May we know once again that we are not isolated beings, but connected in mystery and miracle to the universe, to this community, and to each other.
I am Amy Firestein, co-chair of the worship team, and your lay liturgist today. I welcome you to this virtual worship service of the Unitarian Church of Harrisburg. Because of the continuing danger of the coronavirus, the building remains closed, but the church remains open. Today and every Sunday, there is a live virtual coffee hour from 11:30 a.m. until 1 p.m. with breakout rooms for conversation. Please check your email on the website at uchbg.org for details and updates. Please send your joy or sorrow via the link in the email you received in the announcement of today's service and indicate whether you give permission for it to be read in next week's service. If you are a visitor or newcomer, I invite you to explore uchbg.org to learn more about the church and its many activities. Whoever you are, wherever you live, whomever you love, whatever you do for a living, you are welcome at the Unitarian Church of Harrisburg. I invite those of you at home to light a chalice, a candle, or whatever you choose to serve as your chalice at home. At times, our own light goes out and is rekindled by a spark from another person. Each of us has cause to think with deep gratitude of those who have lighted the flame within us.
Love is the spirit of this congregation, and service is our gift. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to speak our truths in love, and to help one another.
Wake now my senses and hear the earth call. Feel the deep power of being in awe. Keep with the web of creation your vow, giving, receiving as love shows us how. Wake now my reason, reach out to the new. Join with each pilgrim who quests for the true. Honor the beauty and wisdom of time. Suffer thy limit and praise the sublime. Wake now, compassion, give heed to the cry. Voices of suffering fill the wide sky. Take as your neighbor both stranger and friend, praying and striving their hardship to end. Wake now my conscience, with justice thy guide. Join with all people whose rights are denied. Take not for granted a privileged place. God's love embraces the whole human race. Wake now my vision of ministry clear. Brighten my pathway with rain.
Hello, my name is Corey, and I serve as your Director of Religious Education. Today's story is a Burmese story titled Birds Learn About Friendship. There are 1,062 different kinds of birds that make their homes in the jungles, wetlands, and along the coast of Burma. And once upon a time, those 1,062 kinds of birds did not get along. They were always making a terrible ruckus. Why do you flap your wings so fast? Your feathers are too red. With that technique, you'll never be able to catch a worm. Often the birds got so carried away that they said, "I'm a better bird than you." The reply was always, "No, I'm a better bird than you." There was no friendship amongst the birds, and not much fun either. Finally, Pheasant grew weary. He didn't want to quarrel, so when Crow came along ready to pick an argument, Pheasant said, "Crow, you're a better bird than me." Crow was surprised. Those words warmed his heart, and he replied politely, "No, Pheasant, you are a better bird than me." Pheasant's heart felt warm. The two struck up a conversation. They got to know one another and found that they could get along very well. Before long, they decided to live side by side. The two birds enjoyed one another very much. Now their conversations were completely different than they had been in the days of argument. One day when Pheasant stood stock still, Crow noticed and said, "That was a good way to avoid being seen by enemies." Another time when Crow was building a nest, Pheasant said, "Those sticks will make a good, strong nest. But have you thought about a way to make it a little softer inside?" Crow looked at the nest, and then at his chest. He began to add some downy feathers. Talking and getting along like that made it easy to learn from each other and to be together. The two friends' affection for one another was obvious. The other birds were surprised. How could Pheasant and Crow spend so much time together without quarreling? Some decided to test their friendship. "Pheasant, why do you spend so much time with that good-for-nothing Crow?" "You mustn't say that," replied the Pheasant. "Crow is a better bird than I, and he honors me by living with me." The next day they went to Crow. "Crow, why do you spend so much time with that good-for-nothing Pheasant?" "You mustn't say that," replied Crow. "Pheasant is a better bird than I, and he honors me by living with me." The birds were deeply impressed by Crow and Pheasant's attitude to one another. They began to wonder, why do we always fight and quarrel? They watched how Crow and Pheasant treated one another and soon learned that it wasn't so difficult to be kind. They also learned that when they practiced compassion in the manner of Crow and Pheasant, life was far more enjoyable. And that is how friendship and respect developed among the birds.
Mountain higher, and a raindrop helps the river to flow. You and I are just the same. It's just one to fan the flame of desire to make God change. Each voice that is singing, each hand that is reaching, each heart that is beating, each soul that is seeking, the power
I read for you today the Unitarian Universalist Society for Community Ministries Incorporated's 1988 Community Ministry Proclamation. We as people living in a world that is both dying and seeking to be reborn, who are shaken to our very roots by the massiveness and depth and of planetary and human suffering, are empowered by a driving passion to bear witness to that suffering, participate in its transformation, and affirm the inherent glory of life. 1988 Community Ministry Proclamation and Covenant. Therefore, we do covenant together to respond to these cries of pain, to our own brokenness, and to awaken the healing spirit of hope, to engage in a broad spectrum of ministries through and with UU congregations, the larger community, and increasingly in a global context, to celebrate the diversity of life within our elemental interconnectedness, to challenge one another as individuals and as members of institutions to identify, analyze, and act upon the basic causes of human hurt and separation. Thus empowered, we join hands with the community of faith in acknowledging the larger ministry which addresses our common vision. We call upon our denomination to recognize a variety of lay and ordained ministries as embodiments of the UU principles and purposes. All of our creative ministries, including academic, administrative, aesthetic, AIDS, campus, camp and conference centers, chaplaincies, community-focused, environmental, gay, lesbian, bisexual, healing, legal, men-focused, music, parish, pastoral counseling, pastoral psychotherapy, peace, religious education, social justice, women-focused, young adult, youth and ministries not yet envisioned are valid, necessary, and life-affirming. Such compassionate, liberating, prophetic ministries are at the very heart of a religious tradition. Chicago, Illinois, November 12, 1988. The proclamation was signed by 37 individuals, one of whom was Carolyn McDade.
Today in this congregation, someone is hurting or in sorrow. Today in this congregation, someone is anxious because of events in the world. Today in this congregation, someone is lonely. Today in this congregation, someone is filled with joy and wants to celebrate. For all the fear and sorrow in the world today, there are still moments of joy. We have learned that Tom Atkinson is recovering from a fall and may move to a safer living arrangement in the future. We wish him well. When there is birth, life goes on. When there is death, life goes on. When there is joy, life goes on. When there is sorrow, life goes on. Amen, and blessed be. Sometime in the past, in a Unitarian Universalist congregation like ours, a discussion of what we UUs believe was getting underway. The leader asked the group, "What's something we all believe?" and paused, waiting for it to answer his own question, when a voice from the rear called out, "Recycling!" That simple and I think correct response could have been part of a 2005 report by our UUA's Commission on Appraisal called Engaging Our Theological Diversity, which found that what unites us far outweighs what divides us. We are a community of faith given to engagement with our world, using our power to work for justice and freedom, religious or otherwise. I learned about the report in a book published by my UU Society for Community Ministries called Called to Community. It is a book worth reading, and I will explain why shortly. So, pretty much all UUs who are watching this service are doing lay community ministry. I say that because our Unitarian Universalist Association tells us that community ministry is care for the world outside the walls of the local congregation. So if you are living your UU values by doing advocacy, registering voters, supporting a community food pantry, handing out coats on Allison Hill, or some of the thousands of other expressions of faith in action, you're one of many. Welcome. I feel right at home with you and have for my 50-plus years as a UU. Today I want to lay out my path to community ministry alongside the evolution of community ministry in our UU movement, illustrated with people I've met or learned about along my way, as I've looked for the inherent worth and dignity of people, often in the wrong place. I'm doing this to show that Community Ministry Sunday is for all of us. I will start with a summary of how I got into community ministry. Back in 2001, when Margaret Carreau and John Hargraves and I and a few other hardy souls invented what is now helping people in prison and their families, we had no idea where it might go. Then in 2003, a visiting community minister, Reverend Kate Bortner from York, told me while we were having lunch after her service that I was doing lay community ministry. And here I'd thought we were simply doing applied prison reform, named for the discussion of prison reform that was underway in our UU movement nationally, but applied to real people in need. We were getting the Sunday classified ads to women from work release who were looking for a job, organizing classes for them and getting organized, setting up a clothing bank for job interview attire, and later on, tutoring them to help them pass the GED exam. Kate invited me to join her on the board of a national group of UU community ministry people, then called the UU Society for the Larger Ministry, which began about 1988, as you heard in the reading. I asked Amy to read the name of one of the 37 clergy and lay signers of the 1988 proclamation, social activist and songwriter Carolyn McDade, who wrote Spirit of Life, which we will sing shortly, and We'll Build a Land, which is our closing hymn. I learned in the book Sacred Service in Civic Space that she was remembered by community minister Judy Morris, another participant in that gathering, who recalled that we signed that statement finally in candlelight, and I sang harmony with Carolyn McDade on Spirit of Life, and another minister signed it for her. I was in tears, she recalled, because I was singing harmony with Carolyn McDade, and Carolyn was in tears because he was signing her song. She had never before had anyone sign her song. The UU Society for Community Ministries builds on Unitarian Universalist traditions going back to 1775, when Universalist minister John Murray was appointed chaplain in the Continental Army by George Washington. The tradition includes Unitarian and Universalist laypeople like Benjamin Rush, Clara Barton, Lucy Stone, and Susan B. Anthony, to name just a few. I was invited to serve on the national board as an at-large representative of laypeople doing community ministry. I accepted, and that changed my life. In one of our board meetings via conference call, Kate said she would be teaching a class at Lancaster Theological Seminary, and that got my attention. I arranged to take that course, UU History and Polity, that is, church government, as an unclassified student. That course led to another course and my application to the Master's in Divinity program, the clergy track degree, and with the support of our then minister Howard Dana, I was accepted. I was headed for the UU ministry. All of us MDiv program students were required to do a semester of non-parish field education in a nonprofit or government agency. I knew Chaplain Larry Coleman at Dauphin County Prison because Margaret Carreau and I were on an aftercare committee he'd organized to help people coming out of that prison. Chaplain Coleman invited me to do my field education as an intern chaplain, and I accepted, not knowing what that involved. I went in for what I thought would be a brief orientation in January 2005, and after a discussion of prison chaplaincy, he picked up a stack of religious inventory forms for newly arrived inmates and took me to the cell block. I watched him interview the first inmate to learn three things. First, whether he had any connection to a religious faith tradition. Second, whether there was a pastor or priest or rabbi or imam the chaplain's office could contact on his behalf to arrange for a visit. And third, what religious activities he wanted to take part in. He closed by asking if the man would like a prayer. Then Chaplain Coleman handed me about a dozen forms for the guys I would interview on the spot. I met them all, asked the assigned questions, and then asked, "Would you like me to pray with you?" About half of them said yes, and I would ask, "What would you like me to pray about?" The response was usually about his family or girlfriend, and I learned to pray with inmates on the spot. A few months later, when the field ed requirement was well satisfied, I was invited to stay on as a volunteer chaplain. Except for the prison's pandemic limitations on all volunteers since mid-March of last year, I still serve Dauphin County Prison as a volunteer chaplain. In 2007, I was asked to add the Women's Work Release Center, which had no chaplain at the time. I'm still their chaplain, most recently by telephone, at least until I get vaccinated. The book Called to Community that I mentioned is important to me because, well, let me put it in Reverend Robin Stillwater's words, quoted in an email her mom forwarded to me when Robin was in seminary. "Jim's in one of my textbooks." Yes, the book has a chapter on stories of contemporary community ministry, and my story is in a part called Expanding the Parish Bounds. The book points out that we can see through Jim Cavenaugh's story that the decision to seek ordination as a community minister is one that opens some doors and closes others. It is a decision to be made thoughtfully and carefully in the context of community. I left the clergy track at seminary because I wanted to stay connected to our UCH group, helping people in prison and their families, and ordained clergy always leave their former congregations. I earned my Master of Arts in Religion degree in 2007. My community ministry expanded beyond chaplaincy to reproductive justice when I was a pro-choice escort at a women's health clinic on Front Street in Harrisburg in the mid-90s, and that led to my helping start a new kind of community ministry for me, what later became Planned Parenthood Keystone's Fund for Choice. It provides funds for women to help relieve the financial burden of affording an abortion. I went to Washington in 2011 with the Planned Parenthood Key Advocates delegation for some in-person advocacy, and after the trip I met the founders of Pennsylvania Clergy for Choice, which I wanted to join. They welcomed me, but not being clergy, I suggested a new organizational name, the Pennsylvania Religious Coalition for Reproductive Justice. They liked that, went along with the new name, and encouraged me to strengthen the group, and before long I became the incorporator and the first president of the Pennsylvania Religious Coalition for Reproductive Justice. Again, this was a new kind of community ministry for me. We learned from the UUA's Reproductive Justice resource and elsewhere that reproductive justice is intersectional with anti-racism, anti-patriarchy, and the struggle against other oppressions like gender, income, and immigration status. So we are consciously working to incorporate diversity, equity, and inclusion into all we do. 2 of our board members are women of color, and our new co-presidents are both women, one a person of color from State College, and the other our own Barb Pierce, a leader in the UCH Reproductive Justice Allies. My chaplaincy, combined with my support for reproductive justice, led me to accept when I was invited to take online training to become counselor for a group called Faith Aloud. They provide non-judgmental spiritual counseling to people across the country on their confidential clergy counseling line. I took the training last December and passed the role-play final exam based on actual conversations with callers, in which I counseled a staff member who was playing the part of a woman struggling with an abortion decision. I now do a few shifts each month, answering calls from women around the country who need non-judgmental pastoral counseling. It is intense but satisfying. That's my summary of where I am now in my chaplaincy. Yes, I've met some really interesting people on both sides of the cell door. While you might think the inmates with the most terrible crimes might be an issue, they are not, because I never ask, and they almost never volunteer that information. No, my biggest challenges have been 2. First, the fundamentalist Christians I meet in prison ministry, who know in their hearts that there is only one answer to life's most difficult questions, and it revolves around their faith. When they find out that I'm a UU Christian, they're often suspicious. How can a person who recognizes and accepts many faiths as valid, as shown by the medallion I wear to work release, minister with them when they know there's only one true faith? Luckily, in a great book, The Call to Care, offering 16 essays by full-time UU chaplains, the essay Wider Circles of Inclusion offered me the insight I needed. The chaplain who wrote it made it clear that she struggled with intolerant fundamentalist Christian co-workers, particularly when they attacked same-sex marriage, not knowing she was in such a marriage. Chaplain Holly Ann Lux Sullivan tells the reader, "We are called by our faith in humanity, in the universe, in life itself, to try to see past the stated beliefs of people whose words incite outrage in our hearts. We must look to see how they use those beliefs in life. Are they able to put them aside and be with those they work with as equals, or do those beliefs hamper their ability to treat others with respect? We must look to see what the beliefs do for them. Is the punishing, intolerant God a form of self-protection, reassurance that someone is looking out for them, even if that someone is a faraway God? Her words both comforted me, giving me a way to control my outrage at those whose views seem so harmful, and they challenged me, because if I'm to see what their beliefs do for them, I must listen deeply. That kind of listening could be the subject of a whole different sermon, because it requires the listener to let go of judgment, of anger, of opinion, of right versus wrong thinking, and maybe to follow some cryptic words of Rumi, this 13th century Persian poet and mystic who said, "Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right-doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there." My second challenge is dealing with intolerant, that is, racist, white supremacist, and anti-Semitic inmates at the prison. For example, after the Charlottesville riots in August 2017, I led a Chapel Talk pastoral counseling group of inmates to wrestle with the questions raised by the riots. They attended voluntarily without knowing the day's topic. To my dismay, I found, in a group that was two-thirds people of color, a guy that looked like a skinhead, complete with an Iron Cross tattoo. He was not disruptive, although his words bothered the people in color in the circle a lot. His answer to racism was for all the black people to go back to Africa, and he would eliminate anti-Semitism by sending all the Jews back to Israel. My stomach was in a knot, believe me. I kept the group peaceful by repeating very firmly, "We need to agree to disagree," because I didn't know how to address the guy's obvious white supremacy attitude with the group underway. Knowing what I know now, I'm thinking maybe I could have had a one-on-one conversation with him later, emphasizing that I value his inherent worth and dignity and listening as best as I could. As you might have discovered, I am a chronic optimist. I said in my description of this service that I would talk about some of the interesting souls I've encountered or might encounter in my chaplaincy. From the start of putting this service together, my aim was to share how I've learned to appreciate the inherent worth and dignity of people I pretty much can't stand, like President number 45 and his supporters. Maybe you have struggled with that challenge as well. So I'm imagining meeting a Trump supporter when next I'm at work release or the Dauphin County prison. Somehow, the person makes it clear that they are still supporting a man who, to me, is by far the worst president in American history, and they feel the election was stolen. Their president really won. So I take a deep, centering breath, let go of my ideas of right-doing and wrong-doing, and focus instead on listening well, learning to understand what their beliefs do for them. I'm driven to work hard at this because only if I can listen well can I be part of the healing our nation needs. To come back to my sermon title, why am I looking for inherent worth and dignity in all the wrong places? Because I haven't fully learned to live out our first principle, which teaches us that we need to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Listen, affirm and promote. We don't need to look for it, because to paraphrase a new hymn by Jason Shelton about how love has already won, the inherent worth and dignity is already there. May we all be blessed with the idea to see it in all the people we encounter, even the ones we pretty much can't stand. Amen, and blessed be.
For the month of February, the plate collection will go to support Speranza Animal Rescue of Mechanicsburg. Based on a farm near Mechanicsburg, Speranza Animal Rescue rescues animals, mainly dogs, from a variety of situations. Animals saved have come from owners surrendering, dogs on the euthanasia list at kill shelters, and from unimaginable cases of abuse, neglect, and misfortune. Speranza takes on cases regardless of the medical costs associated and accepts dogs with behavioral issues that most rescue organizations won't consider. It also welcomes volunteers to assist with dog walking and other farm chores. UCH member and my worship team co-chair, Debbie Rehart, is involved with the organization. There is a link for contributing to today's plate collection in the video description below. You may have to click on the words, "Show More," to see it. The same link is in the email that went out to members this morning. Your financial support and commitment matter. Please be generous.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea. Shape of justice, roots for deep rose, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
Our call to action tells us that community ministries of both pastoral and prophetic kinds make real in the larger world the commitment of all Unitarian Universalists to the shared mission of our faith, to do all we can to contribute to the creation of the tipping point, whereby the values we affirm in our UUA 7 principles may lead us to a just, healed, and transformed world. To add the words of Catholic social justice activist Dorothy Day, who was quoted in one of the readings in the back of our gray hymnal, people say, "What is the sense of our small effort? They cannot see that we must lay one brick at a time, take one step at a time. A pebble cast into a pond causes ripples that spread in all directions. Each one of our thoughts, words, and deeds is like that. No one has a right to sit down and feel hopeless. There is too much work to do." Our call to action also asks us to appreciate that ours is an evolving faith tradition, as shown by the name of our gray hymnal, Singing the Living Tradition. That hymnal includes far more inclusive songs than we had before. Our closing hymn, number 121 in that hymnal, has been identified as hurtful to Native American UUs and others, and so an alternative chorus was created for an inclusion in a future hymnal, but not the one our choir used when recording it. Here is the new chorus for you to consider and perhaps to sing when we include "We'll Build a Land" in future services, as I hope we will. Come build a world where families and neighbors, united by love, when may then create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream.
We'll build a
Our benediction is by Darcy Rook, a UU community and parish minister. There is too much hardship in this world not to find joy every day. There is too much injustice in this world not to right the balance every day. There is too much pain in this world not to heal every day. Each of us ministers to a weary world. Let us go forth now and do that which calls us to make this world more loving, more compassionate, and more filled with the grace of divine presence every day. Amen, and blessed be.